fight that was originally supposed to happen back at UFC Fight Night Holloway Cater back in January that was moved because Phil Hawes had some sort of weird injury that was never totally disclosed. If you know what it was, let everybody know down below in the comments. But we had a hard time trying to figure out what it was. But all that to say, we've talked about this fight in great detail. You have the 32-year-old Phil Hawes, a guy that's been on Contender Series. He's been all over the map. World Series, taking on Nassourdine Imavov. From MMA Factory of Ferdinand Lopez, Cyril Gane, Alain Baudot, all the guys that you know and love. So we're going to go back into that original prediction, and then at the end, we're going to update the odds, and we're going to give our final picks here. Somebody's win streak has to end at middleweight. We have France's Nassourdine Imavov taking on Megatron Phil Hawes. And Matt, Calvin Johnson's up for the NFL's Hall of Fame really soon, and we have another Megatron coming in here in Abu Dhabi. And listen, Phil Hawes is a guy that I've heard Rashad Evans talk about for the longest time. And I'd say the comparisons have to be, well, at one point they both trained at Jackson Wink, and then they moved to Florida. And for Phil Hawes, representing Stanford MMA, training with some of the best in the world. And this was a guy that, when he came into the Ultimate Fighter, when he ended up on Contender Series, there's always been big things expected of him. And I think for Phil Hawes, the questions started to come in when he was fighting with World Series. Didn't really go his way, but he really has looked good of late. You focus on his last 5 huge wins. You look at the win over Kachimarov Bestayev over on Contender Series, the win over Jacob Malkoun. I will never get over because you shouldn't have had to pay for that one on a pay-per-view, but it happened, and he looked amazing in that fight. And for MMA Factory's Nassourdine Imavov, we were so high on this guy coming into his MMA debut against Jordan Williams, and didn't he deliver? And I know he might not have won every round on the judges' scorecards, but by the end of it, you could just look at both guys' faces and tell who won that fight. Nassourdine Imavov put on a great performance. There's a lot of comparisons, and even mid-fight, I believe it was Dan Hardy made the comparison between Nassourdine Imavov and his teammate Cyril Gane, and not just the fact that they wear the same shorts, although one of them probably a lot slimmer waist size wise, but they fight very similar. If you want to have another crack at a guy that fights somewhat similar to Nassourdine Imavov, or looks like him in the stand-up, it's probably Thiago Santos, and the fact that they keep their legs quite spread apart. They're very light on their feet. They keep their hands a little low. But Nassourdine Imavov, a very good striker. If you want to see a good example of just how good his striking can be, not just that Williams fight, but the fight that he had against UFC vet Jonathan Meunier, the Canadian, over with Aries at Aries 1. It's a good example of just exactly what Nassourdine Imavov can do. And maybe he doesn't have the best power, but his volume's there. His grappling's there. He's very good in the clinch. And when he's on the ground, he's not just a fish out of water.
No, and I do think that's an important point to bring up. Because for Phil Hawes, he can go out there and knock out pretty much anyone in any weight class at any point. Not to say he'd beat Francis Ngannou, but I think he'd have a chance just because he does hit so hard, and especially for this weight class. But Imavov does have the ability to switch it up. If the striking is going poorly for him, I like his wrestling and his overall game a little bit more than I do like Phil Hawes. Now, yes, Imavov is not going to go out there and just start shooting double-A takedowns like he's Gregor Gillespie. He will play the striking game, and that could get him caught early on in the fight. But just as an overall skill set, Imavov does have a little bit more complete game. And for Phil Hawes, listen, Phil Hawes is one of the oldest prospects you're ever going to see. And he's not in the Eric Silva category where you can lose 7 fights in a row and still be considered a prospect and be put in every UFC game. But he is at an advanced age, and he's in that Hani Barcelos category, if you will, where I really like a lot of what they do. I just wish they were about 6 years younger so they could go on the run a little bit earlier. Because for Phil Hawes, at 185, it is a competitive weight class, to say the least. And for you to be 9-2... at 32, you've really got to start picking up big wins quick. And a win over Imavov, yes, that might set you up for let's say a Brad Tavares, if you will, one of those kind of maybe bubble top 15 guys. But Phil Hawes needs to get to work fast. He wants to make something big happen. And the fight against Imavov, I think, is a risky fight to take because for Hawes, I always assumed that the UFC would match him up in a lot of those, we're going to make Phil Hawes fight not Luke Rockhold, but you get the idea. Just sort of a more established name at the end of their career so he can get a more notoriety fairly quick. And for the UFC to be putting him in there against a guy like Nassourdine Imavov, who A, is very elusive, so he's not going to be there for the big power shot constantly, and B, just is kind of a well-rounded guy who does specialize in striking. It's a risky fight for Phil Hawes to be taken.
And I mean, Jordan Williams, say what you will about him and how good of a fighter he is. I don't care. He lost to Kazula Vargas on the regional scene. That's kind of a weird loss. But He did crack Nassourdine Imavov a couple of times, but Imavov rolled with the punches. He has very good lateral movement. Phil Hawes moves great in a straight line. Go watch that fight against Jacob Malkoun. And I remember the narrative going into that one was the fact that Malkoun's a training partner of Robert Whittaker. They fight in the same weight class. And this is a classic line. If you ever want to doubt a fighter, it's, oh, nobody wants to fight him. He's 4-0. Nobody wants to fight him. Well, nobody wanted to fight Jacob Malkoun because A, the Whittaker connection, but B, how good he is in jiu-jitsu. Phil Hawes walked in there and under 20 seconds knocked him out with one punch. Yeah, so Malkoun just absolutely melted up against the cage, and that was it. Phil Hawes is a decent-sized favorite in this one. He's a minus 162, open to minus 181, so the money's coming in on Imavov, who opened a plus 159. He's a plus 135 over on Best Fight Odds. If you have a look over on Tapology, 854 total votes, 77% Hawes, 83% have him to win by knockout. And now I have to dispel one thing that you said, Matt, and I'm not going to harp on it. I'm not going to get upset. I do also believe Nassourdine Imavov has a more complete game in MMA. The one thing is the wrestling. Phil Hawes, JUCO national champ. If you watch some of his early fights, he definitely can wrestle. And it's one of those things that I think if Phil Hawes isn't able to land the power shot early, which is definitely a worry if you're a big Phil Hawes fan, then maybe he resorts to the wrestling in the later stages of A, the first round, or the second and third. Nassourdine Imavov, I like as this fight goes on. Again, if he can withstand the early power in the first, maybe you look at him in the second and third.
So, where you zigged, I'm going to kind of zag. And the same can sort of be said for Imavov. Does he have good footwork? Yes. He has to get hit before he starts using his footwork, though. And for Imavov, he will get on his bike. He does use that really good lateral movement. But it takes him a few hits to kind of remind himself that, yes, I do have really good footwork. And against a guy like Phil Hawes, that's not a risk I'd be willing to take throughout the fight. And yes, Phil Hawes is the more credentialed wrestler. But the footwork of Imavov is going to make life hell on Phil Hawes. If he is going in there looking for a takedown, if he isn't able to land that big bomb, and he is starting to get tired himself, and he's finding himself chasing after Imavov as the fight progresses, things can go south very fast for Phil Hawes. The difference is I still think Phil Hawes is going to catch him with a big shot early on. Imavov, yes, he has the footwork, but it takes him a little while to use it, and I think that's all Phil Hawes needs. He just needs that one punch. And we say that for some fighters, and normally that's what I look at, and I'm like, oh, I'd rather not pick the guy who has to rely on that one shot. But for Hawes, he has kicks, he has power in both hands, and I do think he'll be able to find the shot at some point throughout the fight.
So you have Sanford MMA's Phil Hawes taking on MMA Factory's Nassourdine Imavov. Again, these guys were supposed to fight back in January on Fight Island, and now we get them here. So if we have a look over at the Tapology votes, Matt, we've known about this fight for a bit. 795 total votes, 73% Hawes, 82% by knockout. Again, I ragged on and on, but I'm still salty at the fact they made us pay for Phil Hawes and Jacob Malkoun. I think it's ridiculous. If we have a look at the odds now, Phil Hawes open to minus 118 favorite, kind of bounced around over the last week or so, going up from ever so slightly minus 122. If you look at Nassourdine Imavov, about a minus 102 average, and it's still there on Best Fight Odds. So, you've got Phil Hawes, that's a favorite here. You've got him as a pretty big, I would almost say massive favorite with the fans over on Tapology. What are your final feelings about this fight here?
First of all, I'm very surprised. Now, here's the thing. The odds should be close on this fight. This is a phenomenal fight. Not only should the odds be close, their records are actually, they're 100% identical. I'm surprised how many people are siding with Hawes to not only win, but win by finish. Like, yes, he is a very good finisher when he has his opponent hurt. He is great at not just going for the finish and getting tired not getting it, but once he does pursue the finish, he tends to get it. But Imavov, he just can fight at so many different ranges, and that's what makes this fight fun. I'm a little concerned about the injury that Hawes is coming off of. Again, don't really know how serious it was. Could have been nothing. Could have stubbed his toe. Could have been super major. But again, it was only about a month and a half ago, so hopefully it wasn't anything too crazy. I'm going to side with Imavov just by the slightest of margins, though.
Matt, I'm going with Nassourdine Imavov. I mean, maybe there was an inkling, again, back in that January card. You had gone with Hawes in that one. I went with Imavov. I like Imavov for the fact that he can stick a move. I like the technique over the power. But again, Phil Hawes is one of those guys that you've heard about for a really long time because he's fought a high level of competition. He's fought in some big spots. Like, you look at it. He wins on Contender Series. He fought on Contender Series 2017. Got finished by, how did that song go again? Miley Cyrus's Julian Marquez. He has a loss to Luis Taylor with World Series, and he was on The Ultimate Fighter Season 23 and lost to Andrew Aldierte Sanchez. So Phil Hawes has fought in big spots. Unfortunately, he's lost in some big spots, but the wins have been good, and he won on UFC 254, which is a big pay-per-view opportunity for him. So, again, I'm going to take technique over power in this one. I'm going to go Imavov over Hawes, but it's a super volatile matchup, and you would not be able to find this one on my personal card. So, we're both going with France's Nassourdine Imavov, the Russian sniper, to get the win. Let us know if we're crazy people in the comments section, because I know from originally doing this one that a lot of people were going with Phil Hawes. I'm really looking forward to this fight. We have a great card. Oleinik Dakish. You've got Min Erosa. You've got Vieira taking on Kunitskaya. And you have Blaydes Lewis on this main card for our Fight Nights. Keep locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say.
Let's get into it.